Western Spring Television. Ours it is.
Good evening and welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. Organized labor issues for a 5-day ultimatum for the redeployment of Imo State Police Commissioner. U.S. Secretary of State appeals to Israel to protect civilians in Gaza as Hezbollah threatens regional war. Japan, Philippines leaders agree to start negotiations on a reciprocal troop access deal. My name is Evelyn Ohiola. We'll begin right here in Nigeria, where the Nigeria Labour Congress NLC and the Trade Union Congress TUC has issued a 5-day ultimatum for the redeployment of the Commissioner of Police in Imo State. The ultimatum is a response to the attack on the NLC President Joe Ajaero in Owerri, the Imo State capital, on Thursday. The organized labor made the call in a press briefing in Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory, this afternoon, calling for the arrest and prosecution of the special advisor to the Imo State Governor Uzodimma on special duties. The labor leaders threatened to embark on a nationwide industrial action if their demands are not carried out. The union leaders are accusing the Imo State government as well as the police for being responsible for the attack on the NLC leader. However, both the police and the state government had denied every allegations against them in their separate responses on Friday. Mr. Ajaero was arrested in Owerri, the capital of Imo State, on Wednesday during a protest by workers in Imo State, but the police has said the NLC president was taken into custody for his protection. To the war on Gaza, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has appealed to Israel to take steps to protect civilians in Gaza as its forces kept up their bombardment of the Palestinian enclave and a death toll among residents soared. The Israeli military said its troops were fighting Hamas militants in close-quarter combat in the ruined streets after encircling Gaza City in their bid to wipe out the Islamist group that controls the densely populated territory. Mr. Blinken was visiting the region for the second time in less than a month to show support for the close ally Israel in its response to the October 7 Hamas attack on southern Israeli communities that killed about 1,400 people and triggered the war. Speaking before meeting Israeli President Isaac Herzog, Mr. Blinken reiterated that Israel has a right to do everything possible to ensure that such an attack never happened again, but added that everything must be done to protect civilians who are caught in the crossfire of Hamas's making and to bring assistance to those who so desperately need it.
Today I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other senior officials about concrete steps to do that. President Biden has consistently stressed the need for Israel to operate according to international humanitarian law. I also emphasized that the protection of civilians must take place not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, where incitement and extremist violence against Palestinians must be stopped and perpetrators held accountable. Third, we need to substantially and immediately increase the sustained flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza and getting American citizens and other foreign nationals out of Gaza. Since we reached agreement with Israel, Egypt, and the United Nations 2 weeks ago on mechanisms to enable humanitarian aid to begin reaching civilians in need, we have scaled up deliveries. We've gone from 0 to now over 100 trucks going into Gaza through the Rafah crossing every day. But this is still not enough. I spoke to Israeli leaders about tangible steps that can be taken to increase the sustained delivery of food, water, medicine, fuel, and other essential needs, while putting in place measures to prevent diversion by Hamas and other terrorist groups. We've identified mechanisms to enable fuel to reach hospitals and other needs in the south. Israel has raised appropriate concerns that we share about Hamas's hoarding and siphoning of fuel in northern Gaza. Again, its cynicism knows no bounds, denying fuel itself that it has to hospitals.
Meanwhile, the leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah, Said Hassan Nasrallah, has warned the United States that preventing a regional war depended on stopping the Israeli attack on Gaza, and there was a realistic possibility of fighting on the Lebanese front turning into a wide war. In his first speech since the Israel-Hamas war erupted on October 7, Mr. Nasrallah also threatened Israel's main ally, the United States, hinting his Iran-backed group was ready to confront U.S. warships in the Mediterranean. He said the Americans can stop the aggression against Gaza because it is the aggression, noting that whoever wants to prevent a regional war must quickly halt the aggression on Gaza. Temitope Ajijolo-Oluola has more on the conflict.
The United States top diplomat Antony Blinken landed in Tel Aviv on Friday to push for humanitarian pauses in the Gaza war, as Israel said it had surrounded the Palestinian enclave's biggest city and the focus of its drive to annihilate Hamas. Blinken, on a second trip to Israel in a month, is due to discuss with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders concrete steps to minimize harm to civilians in besieged Gaza, where food, fuel, water, and medicine are scarce. On the trip to Tel Aviv with Blinken is the newly appointed U.S. ambassador to Israel, Jacob Lew.
As democracies, the United States, Israel, other democracies have a responsibility to do everything possible to protect civilians who may be caught in harm's way. And this, again, is a crossfire, quite literally, of Hamas's making. The fact that it cynically and monstrously, deliberately, has people, men, women, and children, as human shields, puts its command posts, puts its leadership, puts its fighters, puts its weapons, puts its munitions underneath hospitals or even inside them, schools, mosques, makes this incredibly challenging. But we have to rise to that responsibility.
After an hour with Netanyahu, Blinken visits the Israeli War Cabinet and then Israeli President Isaac Herzog. He will next talk with the pressmen and perhaps recount what, if anything, he has accomplished. On Thursday, Netanyahu said the military had encircled Gaza City, the enclave's biggest, and was advancing. The Israel Defense Forces, in a statement on Friday, said its jets, artillery, and navy had struck Hamas targets overnight, killing several militants, including Mustafa Dalal, a Hamas commander it said had directed combat in the Gaza Strip. The fighting this morning is in 5 different areas in Gaza City and the north, where the Israeli ground operation was expanding yesterday, and West Gaza is where the biggest incursion is. The Israeli army is engaging with gunfire from air, sea, and land with the Hamas militants. Hamas issued statements yesterday that they were fighting the Israeli army using anti-tank missiles. The airstrikes continued overnight, especially around Al-Quds Hospital near Gaza City, where about 14,000 people are taking shelter in the hospital. Mounting casualties among Palestinian civilians, along with acute shortages of basic supplies, have intensified calls by global leaders for a pause in fighting or a ceasefire. The United Arab Emirates, one of a handful of Arab states with diplomatic ties to Israel, said on Friday it was working relentlessly for an immediate ceasefire, warning that the risk of regional spillover and further escalation was real. Israel has dismissed these calls, saying it targets Hamas fighters whom it accuses of intentionally hiding among the population and civilian buildings. The White House has also rejected calls for a ceasefire. Blinken is due to meet Jordan's foreign minister Ayman Safadi in Amman on Saturday. In a statement, Safadi and Israel must end the war on Gaza, where he said it was committing war crimes by bombing civilians and imposing a siege. Meanwhile, about 100 British nationals are on the list of people approved to leave Gaza today via the Rafah crossing into Egypt. Israel announced the deaths of 4 more soldiers fighting in the ground offensive, bringing the reported toll to 23. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 9,000 people have been killed in the Strip since 7 October. Israel began its operation after Hamas killed more than 1,400 people in Israel and kidnapped more than 200 others. Hamas and allied Islamic Jihad fighters were emerging from tunnels to fire at tanks, then disappearing back into the network, residents said, and videos from both groups showed. Two U.S. officials speaking on the condition of anonymity said the U.S. was flying intelligence-gathering drones over Gaza to help locate hostages. Thailand said it was in touch with Iran and other governments that can make contact with Hamas for the safe release of nearly 2,000 Thai hostages. The Rafah crossing from Gaza to Egypt was due to open for a third day on Friday for limited evacuations under a Qatari brokered deal aimed at letting some foreign passport holders, their dependents and some wounded Gazans out of the enclave. According to border officials, more than 700 foreign citizens left for Egypt via Rafah on the 2 previous days. Dozens of critically injured Palestinians were to cross too. Israel asked foreign countries to send hospital ships for them. Temitope Ajijalaluola, Western Spring Television News.
Turning to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Russia launched a massive drone attack early this morning, hitting critical infrastructure in the west and south of Ukraine and destroying private houses and commercial buildings in Kharkiv. The Air Force said it shot down 24 side drones out of 40 launched by Russia, the biggest drone attack in weeks to target Kharkiv in the northeast, Odessa and Kherson in the south, and the region of Lviv on Ukraine's border with Poland in the west. The Air Force also said one X-59 missile was shot down. President Volodymyr Zelensky, reacting to the attack, said as winter approaches, Russian troops will try to do more damage, but they will respond to the enemy, adding that air defenses had been active in 10 different regions. Officials say Ukraine is bracing for a second winter of Russian airstrikes on the energy system, which they warn is more vulnerable than it was last year. Elsewhere in Europe, 5 people have been killed after rivers overflowed following torrential rain in the central Italian region of Tuscany. Storm Ciarán continued to lash western Europe. There had been fears that the river Arno could burst its banks in the historic city of Florence, but Tuscan Governor Eugenio Gianni said the high water point had passed around 10:20 a.m. local time without major incident. However, Mr. Gianni said the death toll had risen to 5 after rain swept away cars and forced people to evacuate the lower floors of buildings. A bridge collapsed near the city of Pistoia, killing 2 people, while another person died in the town of Rosignano. According to Italian media, the other 2 victims were elderly people living in the small town of Montmolo. In the meantime, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has announced that Italy will host the summit with African nations it decided to postpone in the wake of the flare-up of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in late January. Ms. Meloni, speaking after a cabinet meeting in Rome today, said the Italy-Africa conference is now scheduled for January 28th to 29th. The scheme, known as the Mattei Plan and named after Enrico Mattei, founder of state-controlled energy group ENI, is expected to lay the ground for cooperation beyond energy. Italy will take over the presidency of the group of 7 G7 nations in 2024 and has pledged to make Africa a central theme while it is at the helm. Moving on, King Charles and Queen Camilla toured East Africa's oldest mosque and a nation fought on Friday as they concluded a 4-day state visit to Kenya, which was marked by questions about Britain's colonial legacy. King Charles met Muslim, Christian, Hindu, and African traditional faith leaders in the coastal city of Mombasa and toured Fort Jesus, which was built by the Portuguese in the 16th century. Heavy rain prevented the royal couple from riding an electric tuk-tuk between venues. The visit, Charles's first to a former British colony since ascending to the throne in September last year, focused on the 2 countries' close cooperation on economic development, climate change, and security issues. He expressed his deepest regret for violence endured during Kenya's independence struggle, but did not offer the apology that many victims and their descendants had called for. British forces killed, tortured, and detained tens of thousands of Kenyans during the 1952 to 1960 Mau Mau revolt, and the colonial regime confiscated vast tracts of fertile land across the country, over the course of nearly 7 decades of rule. You're watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break. Stay with us.
Arrested, affected, sound, found. What do we see? What do we say? Flowing from a spring. A fact A to Z. Check and confirm. Ever expounding current events. Traveling down from the business gist to the globally arising happenings, to the sports news, to the bittersweet infos. Guided transmission, even diffusion, vast and fast, detailed facts are fled. Within seconds, nuggets of words that flew across borders are fired. Stories short and long, wrapped in bundles of words, broken and dissected as it is, except misheard. This is the news as it is.
Welcome back to Spring Global. In the Asia Pacific, the leaders of Japan and the Philippines on Friday agreed to start negotiations on a reciprocal troop access deal in a bid to strengthen military cooperation between two of the United States' closest Asian allies. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, on an official visit to the Philippines, said he and President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. had agreed to work together closely with the United States. And in a veiled reference to China, he said that both shared concern about unacceptable attempts to unilaterally change the status quo by force in the eastern South China Seas. Both the Philippines and Japan have taken a strong line against what they see as aggressive behavior by Japanese vessels amid decades-old dispute over maritime sovereignty. The troop pact would follow a similar deal the Philippines has with the U.S., called the Visiting Forces Agreement, which provides a legal framework under which the U.S. maintains a constant but rotating military presence in the Philippines, largely for training exercises. Staying with the region, Australia Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will highlight trade as an anchor for stabilizing ties when he makes his first visit to China, as badly strained relations move back to an even footing. Mr. Albanese, who arrives on Saturday, will attend the opening of China's top import fair in Shanghai and speak to a large business delegation the following day. He has said he also will raise concerns over rising tensions in the South China Sea in a meeting with President Xi Jinping in Beijing on Monday. His government has taken credit for stabilizing ties with Australia's largest trading partner since coming to office last year, as China lifted most trade blocks imposed in a 2020 diplomatic dispute. Even as Australia moves closer to security ally the United States, which has agreed to sell Canberra nuclear-powered submarines under a trilateral defense technology partnership, anchors with Britain and boosted military exercises, Mr. Albanese has emphasized the importance of better dialogue with Beijing. In another update, Pakistan today opened more border centers to speed up the return of tens of thousands of undocumented Afghans 2 days after a deadline to leave or face expulsion expired. Pakistan has brushed off calls from the UN rights groups and Western embassies to reconsider expelling more than 1 million of Afghans in the country, saying they had been involved in Islamist militant attacks and crimes that undermined the security of the country. Afghanistan denies the accusations. The UN Refugee Agency, the International Organization for Migration, and the UN Children's Fund on Friday expressed concern for the safety of children and families affected by the expulsion, saying a humanitarian crisis was unfolding with winter on the way. The Prime Minister in Afghanistan's Taliban-led administration, Mullah Hassan Ahmad, also expressed reservations, noting that it is 100% against all principles. Facilities at the main northwestern border crossing of Torkham have been increased 3 times to cater for the rising number of returnees. North Korea has confirmed it has shortened some embassies in an effort to rearrange its diplomatic capacity efficiently. Closures that South Korea says indicates the North is struggling under the burden of sanctions. According to media reports and analysts, North Korea is poised to close 25% of its missions worldwide, including the ones in Spain, Hong Kong, and various countries in Africa. A North Korean Foreign Ministry spokesperson confirmed the closure in comments on the ministry website, noting that while some missions were closing, new ones were opening. North Korea, facing extensive sanctions over its nuclear and missile programs, manages to maintain business ties and friendly diplomatic relations with a dwindling number of Cold War-era friends. Meanwhile, South Korea's Unification Ministry, which handles relations with the North, this week said North Korea's closure of some diplomatic missions was a sign it is struggling to make money overseas because of international sanctions. In other news, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has said African countries want an investment-led approach by the United States that would diversify international supply chains of critical minerals. Mr. Ramaphosa made this known today while delivering his opening speech at the U.S.-Africa Trade Summit held in South Africa. The South African president said the continent is looking forward to the U.S. working with African countries to foster investment-led approach. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, in a video address, said that President Biden's administration wants to work with Congress to improve the flagship trade program with Africa, not just renew it without changes. First launched in 2000, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, grants exports from qualifying African countries duty-free access to the United States, the world's largest consumer market. It is due to expire in September 2025, with African countries pushing for an early 10-year extension without changes, despite long-standing bipartisan support from U.S. lawmakers who view AGOA as critical in countering the influence of China in Africa. There are divisions over the need for updates.
Welcome all of you warmly. I know you have been welcomed, but until the President welcomes you, you should hardly ever feel welcome. Now you're welcome. It's a real pleasure to have such a galaxy of all of you here from various countries and also from the United States, whom we are about today. You are all distinguished delegates, and we are pleased that the U.S. representative, Ambassador Tai, is leading a trade delegation here, and it's wonderful to have you here. And maybe as I start, I'd like to thank you and applaud you for the interactions that you and Minister Patel had during the WTO negotiations for vaccines. Gone should be the days when Africa is just seen as a source of rock, soil, dust being exported out of our continent. We now want to produce the products that are finished or near finished that are utilized in other parts of the world.
Now we'll look at some sports stories. Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp will allow forward Luis Diaz decide whether he's able to play this weekend following his father's kidnapping in Colombia. Klopp confirmed the 26-year-old Colombian returned to training on Wednesday as the Reds prepare to face Luton on Sunday. Luis Manuel Diaz and his wife were seized at gunpoint on Saturday. Diaz's mother was later found in Barrancas, but his father remains missing. Club, speaking ahead of the Sunday game, said they will wait to see how it is and go from there, adding that they will not force the situation as it's out of their hands. The Colombian government says Diaz's father was kidnapped by left-wing rebels of the National Liberation Army, sparking a major military and police search. A representative of the group has reportedly said it will free Diaz's father in the coming days.
He was in training 2 days ago. He had yesterday a session and will be part of the team. So we are, what is that? We always wait. If he feels right, he will be here and train with us. The session he had with us, because then we were not here, you could see that when he's with the boys, it's fine, it's okay. But you could see as well that he didn't sleep a lot, and so we have just to see how he is, and then we go from there. The news from Colombia, I didn't get them personally. I always get them forwarded. If they are whatever it's behind it, I don't know 100%. But everything what gives us a little bit of hope is good. So we are waiting actually for the really good news. But that's it pretty much. So I cannot really say what we will do, because we just wait where we can pick up the boy from and go from there. But it's all about him, that he makes himself available or not, and I will not force anything.
And that's all we have for you at this time. But before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. The Nigeria Labour Congress (NLC) and the Trade Union Congress (TUC) has issued a 5-day ultimatum for the redeployment of the Commissioner of Police in Imo State. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has appealed to Israel to take steps to protect civilians in Gaza as it forces kept up the bombardment of the Palestinian enclave. The leaders of Japan and the Philippines on Friday agreed to start negotiations on a reciprocal troop access deal and a bid to strengthen military cooperation. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. I'm Evelyn Ohiola. Thank you so much for your time.